Hey everybody, welcome back to Planet in God. My name is Larry Lubinsky, and if you notice, I'm by myself this time around. My lovely wife Emily is off on a little trip with her family, and so we wanted to put together at least a little video, kind of a prequel to our next series that we've got coming up. We're going to dive into the book of Revelation. And what we wanted to go and do ahead of time was to lay the groundwork for some biblical interpretation. It's very important to have this kind of level set as we look at a prophetic book like the book of Revelation. We have this level set of how we're going to look at and interpret prophecy. Right? Because what some people will do is they'll have one set of rules on how they interpret the Bible for other things, for everything else, basic teachings and whatnot. And then they'll take another set of rules for prophetic words. And that's not how you interpret the Bible. Usually what you want to do is you want to have the same rules of interpretation that you do for teaching, for prophecy, for reproofing, all of it. You want to apply the same concepts kind of in a cookie cutter fashion, because that's the way the Bible is understood. Right? What a lot of people end up doing is they look at prophecy and they go, it can't really mean that. It has to be something completely different. And they do something called allegory. And they kind of make the words mean something that they don't actually mean. Essentially, it's a wonky way to end up with making the Bible say yellow dump truck. Because why not? We can do it. You know, you take verses out of context, you spiritualize verses, and you don't use basic hermeneutics anymore. You just take all that and throw it out the window. Now, we're not going to go over basic hermeneutics. If you want a course on that, we can certainly put that together. But specifically, we're going to look at the hermeneutical rules of interpretation for prophecy, specific to prophetic writings like Revelation. So, and that's the key to understanding the book, is having a good groundwork, good hermeneutics, a good way to look at the book, historical, grammatical, hermeneutical, contextually, and we're going to kind of go through a lot of that today. So we're going to start off going through a couple of rules that are laid out in David L. Cooper. Dr. David L. Cooper, he put together this website called the Biblical Research Society. I'll put a link of that in the description below on where you can go to see some of the rules of interpretation. So we're going to go through these today. And so let's dive in. The first rule we want to look at is specifically, this can be used in general hermeneutic sense when reading any passage in the Bible. This is what's called the golden rule of interpretation. So basically, what the golden rule of Scripture says is when the plain text of Scripture makes sense, seek no other interpretation. If it says something clear enough, you take it at face value. Right? You use the context to kind of help build on that, whether you should or shouldn't take it at face value. But you read the verses before and after, not just the verse itself. You only seek the figurative meaning of a verse if the overall context demands it. So when you're approaching the Bible, it's safe to look at it like it can be understood literally. That is the primary thing, the primary part about the Bible. You take it, it can be understood literally. While there are figures of speech and symbols within the Bible, when those are used, they are usually explained with literal words. Second one we want to get into is this one called the law of double reference. And what the law of double reference says is this: a passage of Scripture can speak of two different persons or events separated by long periods of times. However, they can be blended together. I like what Dr. Fruchtenbaum says of this rule in his book, Footsteps of the Messiah. He says, this law observes the fact that often a passage or block of Scripture is speaking of two different persons or two different events that are separated by long periods of times. The passage can be blended into one picture, and there can be a time gap between the two persons or events, but it's not presented in the text itself. The fact of that time gap exists and is known because of other scripture verses and particular text that identifies that time gap. So let's look at an example of this one, because this one's kind of hard to see. One good example is Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 through 5, which reads, "There shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. His delight is in the fear of the Lord, and he shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall slay the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his loins, and faithfulness the belt of his waist." So when you look at this passage, clearly it's speaking about the Messiah. Verses 1 and 2, though, are speaking of the first coming of the Messiah, how he will be born, the root of the stem of Jesse. Verses 3 through 5, though, talk about the second coming, right? Both prophecies are blended together into one picture of who the Messiah is, but there is a gap of time in between there, where you have the first coming, the birth of the Messiah, and the second coming in the latter half. The reason we know that there's a gap is because other verses talk about how Jesus Christ is born through the lineage of David, lives his life, and then we see in the life of Jesus that he doesn't fulfill that role as king ruling with a rod of iron. Instead, that is reserved for a later time. So that is the law of double reference. The next one we want to look at is this. It is the law of recurrence. So this law essentially says this, that an event is recorded in one passage and then repeated and given additional details later. So usually this involves two blocks of scripture, where the first block, the event happens in a chronological order. And then later down in the book, that event is repeated, but given more details. A good example is in Genesis, chapters 1 and 2. You have Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 31. You see God creating man in his image chronologically. And then you go down to Genesis chapter 2, verses 8 through 35. We get that same event, but more details. More details are given to give us that complete picture of the creation of man and his wife, that first event. And so that's kind of that law of recurrence. We're going to see this as we get into Revelation. Chapters 6 through 16 deal with the events of the tribulation in a chronological sense. And then you get into 17 and 18, those two chapters follow the law of recurrence, where they go back and give us more details about the events of the tribulation. So we're going to see this in action as we dig through the book of Revelation. Now, the last law we want to look at is this one. It is the law of context. And what the law of context says is this: a text, apart from its context, is a pretext. That is, a verse can only mean something due to its context and must not be taken by itself. So that is essentially, you can't just take a Bible verse out of its context and use it, because then it doesn't really mean what you think it means. It's not justified and not used rightly to explain an idea. One example is, then this one unnerves me for whatever reason, but Jeremiah 29:11. This is used in Hallmark cards all over the place, probably why it unnerves me, because it's used out of context in Hallmark cards all the time. Jeremiah 29:11 should be very familiar to you. Says, "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not evil, to give you a future and a hope." Again, out of its context, this is a great Hallmark card. But in the context, you have Yahweh assuring the Jewish exiles in Babylon that he has a long-term plan for their good. Yahweh is telling the Jews in Babylon that he has not abandoned them, right? That is the context of that verse. And so when we pull it out and put it in a greeting card, I'm not Jewish and I'm not an exile in Babylon. It doesn't really apply, but it sounds nice. It's good to know that the Lord promised to care for his people, and that promise comes down to us through faith in Jesus Christ, right? We receive those promises, but that's not what that verse is talking about. We can know that he won't abandon us because he didn't abandon them. But again, that's not what the verse is talking about. Another example, Zechariah 13:6. This one says, "And one will say to him, what are these wounds between your arms? And then he will answer, those which I was wounded in the house of my friends." Now, out of its context, this sounds like it could be talking to Jesus, right? Jesus was on the cross and he was wounded in his hands, right? When he was hung on the cross. However, in the context, when you read verses 2-6 in Zechariah, you see that he's talking about false prophets. And so the verse 6 can only refer to Jesus if he's a false prophet, and he isn't. So this, you have to take a verse in its context. You have to read the whole of it. I kind of like, there's one rule out there, the 20-20 rule, where if you want to look at one verse, you read 20 verses ahead of it and 20 verses after it. And then you have the verse in its context. That's kind of a good way to look at it. At least read a little bit around the verse before you go and use it, throw it around all willy-nilly. So these are the 4 rules of interpretation that we're going to focus on and use as we dig into the book of Revelation. So stay tuned with us as we go through this. We're going to detail it out chapter by chapter, verse by verse, kind of like what we did with our gospel through the new year. Only downside is we're not going to be on a strict schedule. So as Emily and I get the videos out to you, it'll be great. We'll go through Revelation together. We'll learn about it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to dive down and get into any subject that might be of interest to you. All right? So make sure you like, subscribe. We'll see you later in the next one.